9. There is something very touching about them. They look like soldiers. They fight like soldiers. And sometimes they even talk like soldiers. They have all the finest qualities of the fighting man. But behind that is nothing. No love, no family, no happy memory that comes from having truly lived. When I see one of these men killed, I weep more for him than for any ordinary soldier who has lived a full and normal life. Jedi General Kiari Mundi. Darman had flattened Janot's face against the wall and put his blaster to her head in the time it took Etain to jump to her feet. "Steady there, boy," Janot said quietly. "I mean you no harm." He had her pinned securely. The expression on his earnest face was entirely benign. So far divorced from the potential violence he was ready to mete out that Etain shuddered. "Let her go, Darman," she said. "She's a fellow Jedi." Darman stood back instantly and let Janot go. "I'm not a Jedi, I tell you," Janot said irritably. She looked up into Darman's face. "So you'd shoot an old woman, would you?" "Yes, ma'am," Darman said. Etain stared, horrified. "Threats come in all guises. Not all soldiers are young males, and not all soldiers wear uniforms." Etain waited for Janot to aim a kick at his groin. But the old woman broke into a satisfied grin. "There's a sensible boy," she said. "You do well. Trust this one, Etain. He's very good at his job." She peered at the blaster, still firmly in his grip. "DC-17, I see." "There are 4 of them," Etain said, expecting Janot to react with the same disappointment she had. "I know." The woman handed Etain a bundle of rags. "A complete squad of clone commandos. Here. Dry clothing. Nothing chic, but at least it's clean." "Yes, I know all about them. I've been tracking the other 3. "They're okay?" Darman was all anxiety again, still emitting that same sense of child that Etain found hard to bear. "I've got to rejoin them. Where are they?" "Heading north, to RV Gamma." "Whatever you say, lad. You've all led me on something of a dance. You are a challenge to track." "That's how they trained us, ma'am." "I know." Janot was still staring at Darman's face. "You really are a perfect copy of Fett, aren't you? In his prime, of course." Her voice had become lower, with less of the hoarse crackling typical of the very old, and Etain wondered if this was the moment at which she would reveal that she was a Sith. The Padawan slid her hand slowly into her sodden cloak. Janot suddenly became black as Coruscant marble, and then devoid of texture and hair and fabric and wrinkles, as if she were wax poured into a crude mold. Her form began flowing. Darman's incuriously innocent face broke into something like a familiar smile. Etain was ready this time. She was focused. She visualized the lightsaber as part of her arm. She was prepared to fight. "You're the Golanin," Darman said. "We weren't told you were on this mission. How did you manage that?" "I'm not a Valkyrie," said a soothing liquid voice. "I'm his consort, Janot." Now a 4-legged black-furred creature sat up on her haunches and seemed to simply extend upward like a column of molten metal. Girl, you do look surprised. Ethan couldn't argue with that. Even if you'd encountered the full diversity of non-human species, and she certainly had even within her own Jedi clan, seeing a shapeshifter metamorphose before your eyes was mesmerizing. On top of that, even this naive clone soldier knew what this creature was. She didn't. You're quite a revelation, Janot. But why can't I sense something about you that feels like the Force? We're telepaths, the Galanan said. Oh. No, I'm not delving into your mind. It doesn't work like that. We communicate only with each other. But I heard your voice that night in my mind. I was standing near you, actually. Not in any shape you'd notice, of course. And me, ma'am? Daman asked, seeming totally absorbed by the conversation. Yes, I told you to get some sleep. I make a convincing fallen tree, don't I? Janet flowed and changed and reassembled herself into the epitome of a crone again. I know, stereotypical, but effective. Old women are invisible, like you, Darman. We go where others won't and do what others can't. The communications network here is totally controlled by the Trade Federation. And in practice, that means a single relay and monitoring ground stations at Teklet. And while my kind cannot transmit details over interstellar distances, we can communicate broad ideas and notions to each other. My consort and I are your comlink. Not perfect, but better than silence. The Galanan made a liquid sound like water boiling. I spent the last 2 days running myself ragged to gather this intelligence. And it's as much for this young man as it is for you. Guess Hakan now has command of the armed forces here, such as they are. And he's no fool. He realizes we public troops are here for Uthan's box of tricks. Darman, he's tracking your comrades. We are pretty good at evasion. Yes, but they do tend to leave bodies and parts behind them. He admits he doesn't know how many of you there are, and that troubles him. You are privy to his concerns, then? Etain said. She trusted nobody now. She still didn't know who had betrayed Master Folia. And until she did, she would keep an open and cautious mind. Although her master hadn't told her about the crones, he must have known if he had discovered Uthan's activities. But he hadn't trusted her, for all his kind words. When it came down to it, he simply confirmed, even from the grave, that she was not fit to become a Jedi Knight. I know Hoken's concerns because I can make a very convincing old man as well as an excellent grandmother, Janot said. The reply made no sense. I'll catch up with Darman's comrades and try to direct them to somewhere safe. They have no reliable intel, as you call it, a finite amount of ordnance, and no advantage of surprise any longer. Hoken knows what you have come to do, and he has enough firepower and droids to stop you. That makes your mission next to impossible, without some change of plan or intervention. Darman considered her carefully. Janot's news hadn't dented that tangible confidence. Etain saw not a flicker on his face. It could be worse. I quite liked the sound of a single transmitter. Might I also add that locals will turn you in for one chance to get distinguishedly drunk. Damin looked at Etane. She squirmed. Out of ideas, soldier? She asked. I rate your orders, Commander. It was the final straw. Weeks of fear, hunger, and fatigue on top of years of doubt and disillusion suddenly brought Etane's fragile edifice crashing down. She had done all she could do, and there was nothing left in her to give. Stop it. Stop calling me Commander. She felt her nails dig into her palms. I am not your blasted commander. I haven't a clue what to do next. You're on your own, dumb man. You're the soldier. You come up with a plan. Janot said nothing. Etane felt her face burn. She had lost all dignity. A lifetime of careful training in the art of control and contemplation had come to nothing. Daman changed before her eyes. He transformed not in the physical sense that the Gulanin had, but the change was just as startling, because the sense of the child that Etane detected so clearly simply evaporated. Its place was taken by calm resignation, and something else, a rather forlorn feeling. She couldn't pin it down. Yes, ma'am, he said. I'll do that right away. Gina jerked her head in the direction of the door. Get some air, dumb man. I need to talk to Commander Turmakan. Daman hesitated for a moment and then slipped outside. Jeanette rounded on Etane. Listen to me, girl, she whispered, all harsh sibilance. Droplets of fine saliva glittered briefly in the dim-lit light. That soldier may think a Jedi's every word is a divine pronouncement, but I don't. You'd better sharpen up fast. The commandos and I are all that stands between maintaining some kind of order in the galaxy and its fragmentation. Because if the clone army can be wiped out, then the Separatists will win. You can either help us or stand aside, but you will not be an obstacle, and that's what you are if you can't lead those men. They've been bred to obey Jedi without question. Sadly, in this case, that means you. Etane was used to feeling worthless. There was no lower place than that Janot could cast her. I didn't ask for that responsibility. And neither did Darman, Janot flashed back into a mass of seething black sinews. For a terrifying second. That's the nature of duty. It calls, and you give your all. He will. So will his comrades, every single one of them. They need you to help them do their job. I'm still learning how. Then learn fast. If those soldiers weren't conditioned to obey you, I'd consider cutting you down now and have done it with it. My kind have nothing to thank Jedi for, nothing at all. But we share a common enemy, and I want to see Valakil again. Think yourself lucky. Do not strut out. Etane sank down on her knees in the hay and wondered how she had come to this. The barn door creaked open slowly, and Damen peered around. Don't mind me, she said. You're okay, ma'am? He winced visibly. Apologies, Etane. You'll probably think I'm useless as well, don't you? I came up with a plan as you ordered. Bred for diplomacy too, eh? If Hogan has set the facility as a decoy, then we need him to think that we believe it's still the genuine target. So we split. I'll take that as a yes. Dunman lapsed into silence. I'm sorry, she said. Carry on. He knelt down facing her and swept the floor clear with his hand, creating a clear space on which to demonstrate something. He reached for some crusts of bread and a lump of insect-eaten wood. What do you think I am? He asked quietly. From what Jinnat says, a clone soldier's bred to obey. She watched him break the wood and end the crust into separate chunks, and place them in a row like game pieces. No choice. But I do have a choice, he said. A choice in how I interpret your orders. I'm intelligent. I've seen Jedi fight, so I know what you're capable of. Once you're exposed to situations that call on your skills, you'll be the same. It was all contradictions. She wondered for a moment if he wasn't a clone soldier at all, but another Galanin, playing spiteful games with her. But she could feel a combination of cries, desperation, and faith. Yes, faith. He was the only person in many years who had shown any degree of confidence in her, and the first since Master Fulia who had shown her real kindness. Very well, she said. This is your overriding order. Whatever happens, you are to intervene if anything I do or say compromises your mission. No, don't look at me like that. She held up her hand to stifle the protest she could see forming on his lips. Think of me as a commander in training. You must train me. That might mean showing me the correct way to do things, or even saving me from my own lack of experience. She could hardly bring herself to say it, and that's an order. He almost smiled. This is why I have confidence in obeying a Jedi commander. Your wisdom is unequaled. Etienne had to think about that for a few seconds. If Jinnat had said it, she would have seethed. Daman meant it, and perhaps he meant it in a number of ways. Yes, he was intelligent and subtle, not a droid at all. How did a 10-year-old get that way? Disturbed, she concentrated on the comfort of believing that he had seen things that she never had, and so knew best. Go on, she said. You had a plan. Avi Gamma, laying up point, nightfall. How do you feel now? Nina asked. Aiton moved his arms, bent at the elbow in a swimming motion, testing his pectoral muscles. Nearly good as new. No breathing problems either. No, just a hard smack on the plate. Pi's disembodied voice spoke up in their helmet's comlinks. He was tucked under a bush on the edge of the ridge, keeping watch on the track below. I'm such a good field medic. Wait till you see me do a tracheotomy. I'll pass if that's all right with you, Eaton said, easing off his helmet. Dinner? What do you prefer? Nana asked. Dry rats, or maybe dry rats? Let's go with the dry rats for a change. Yes, Atin was definitely feeling better. and not just physically. Who used to say that then? The dry rations things. Oh, Scarata, our old instructor sergeant. Aten took a bite out of the right cube and washed it down with a gulp of water from his bottle. He never trained us. Heard a lot about him. Trained Phi and Darman too. Our squads were all in the same battalion. We had Wallon Vow. That explains where you get your cheery outlook. Sergeant Vow taught us the importance of planning for the worst scenario. Aten said, all loyalty, and maximizing your tech. Being hard is good. Being hard with superior tech is better. I'll bet. I'd heard everyone loved Scarata, though, even if he was a bad-tempered drunk. Nana had never been drunk, and he didn't even know what alcohol tasted like. He cared what happened to us. He was one of us, pretty much. Not just there because he couldn't cope with not being in the army anymore, or had to disappear. No, he was a good man. Nino would have given a great deal to have seen Scarata come limping through the trees right then, demanding to know what they were doing, longing around like a bunch of Kaminoyan's Nara artists. No idea where he is now, not since we left Commando. Best covered ops and sabotage man ever. You'd know, of course. Well, we'll all know soon. I'm relying on what he taught us to get this mission completed. Nina ate the perfectly balanced, sensible designed, and utterly tasteless cube, and sat silently, still waiting for Darman. They couldn't even trap something and cook it. The smell of roasting meat and the light of the fire would betray their position. With Phi on watch, he could shut his eyes and sleep for a couple of hours. He put his helmet back on, partly to be ready to move fast if they had enemy contact, and partly to keep the temperature up in his suit. It was getting chilly. He allowed himself one comfort that he didn't really need, for morale. You scare me. You just absorbed everything I tell you. Don't you ever forget. No, Sarge, Nina said. He had no idea how long he'd been asleep. He woke with a start at the sound of Phi's voice. Possible contact, due east, range 40 clicks. Looks like it's centered on Imbrani. Even through the visor, it wasn't clear exactly what Phi had spotted. But Nina could see it now, too. A glow marked the horizon like a false sunrise. It was constant, the gentlest graduation from amber to deep red. It wasn't an explosion. Nina switched between the visor modes. Main spectrum to infrared to full spectrum, and then back again. The glow was hot, too. The infrared long range picked it up. I reckon that's one big fire coming, Phi said. They waited, watching. Nina could hear Aten's a few meters away, gathering up equipment and assembling it, ready to pull out. With the binocs on full distance, they could see that the fire was being eclipsed in places by billows of smoke. Eventually, Aten joined them, and all three observed the distant blaze in silence. They're not burning crop stubble at night, Fi said. They haven't even finished harvesting that sticking box stuff yet. They found something. I know. Either they've found Daman, and they're teaching the locals not to shelter the enemy, or they haven't found Daman, and they are trying to flush him out. Nana thought it was relatively good news, but it means he made the landing, he said. So we right here right up to the last second, and maybe a little longer just to be sure. Eisen laid the gear down again. He was too professional and disciplined to slam it on the ground. But Nina picked up on the slight sag of his shoulders. And if he doesn't show by then, he asked, with a level tone that suggested that he didn't want to show dissent any longer. Next plan. We take another look at the whole area from Teklet to Imbrani, Nina said. We start from scratch. This isn't to scale, Daman said. He scraped marks in the loose soil on the exposed dirt floor of the barn and placed pieces of stale bread carefully on the crude chart. This is the river. These three crusts are always alpha, beta, and gamma. He snapped the wood into more pieces and placed them. This is the droid base, and this is Uthan's lab. Etain held out her cupped hand. He dropped 2 chunks of wood into it. This is Lick Ankit's residence, she said. He's the Nemodian overlord, for want of a better word. He runs the agricultural produce export business, and that near enough makes him an emperor here. Okay, what else have we got? Etain crumpled her remaining lump of wood into smaller pieces and scattered them carefully in patches. And Brawny itself and Teklet, which is the spaceport, and a storage and distribution depot. And this was the last known positions for my squad. Etain stared at the worm-eaten wood and the moldy crust that might help them save the Grand Army from destruction. Why are we scraping maps in the dirt when we've got perfectly good holocharts? That's what Sergeant Scarata used to do, Darwin said. He didn't like hollows. Too transparent. He also thought that feeling the textures of dirt focused your mind. And you don't need any technology to do it. He was a great believer in intuition. Darwin drew his blaster and turned suddenly. The barn door opened. He relaxed and dropped his arm to his side. Jeanette held more drab fabric bundled in her arms. You have to go, she said breathlessly. Take a look out there to the east. They're burning the fields to flush you out and deny you cover. There's somewhere you can lie low, but you have to pass for farmers. That's not going to be easy for you, lad. You're too big and well fed. Etain didn't rise to the bait. She knew she'd fit in fine with the undernourished, shabby locals. I have to take my gear, Darwin said. I can lay up somewhere with it, if I have to. Can you leave any of it? Not if we are going to blow up that facility. I've got all the implosions ordnance to deal with the nanovirus, as well as the EREB cannon. We need it. Then take care. There's a curfew on powered vehicles. Jeanette tossed one of the bundles to Daman. And get out of that armor. You couldn't be more conspicuous if you were wearing a wedding gown. We can try to make Avi Gamma. Now, go to the first safe house you can find. I'll reach your squad and let them know then. I'll return to you. There was an assortment of barrows and handcarts stored in the barn, all in the various states of disrepair. They'd attract no attention. The network of dirt roads was well traveled by people trying to get their quota of bark and other crops to Teklet, on foot or with merely carts. Loading the sections of the blaster cannon on the sturdiest barrow they could find made Etienne realize just how heavy a burden Daman had carried. When she tried to heave one of the grey packs into the cart, it nearly wrenched her shoulder from the socket, so he decided to enlist a little assistance from the force. She hadn't expected it to be so heavy. She wasn't the only one with deceptive physical strength. "This is all weapons?" she asked. "Pretty much." "Not enough to take 100 droids, though." "Depends how you use it," Daman said. Etienne wondered if he looked more conspicuous out of his sinister grey armor than in it. The armor had made him look much bigger, but even without it, he was so solidly built that it was obvious he spent his life training for strength, eating adequate protein. Subsistence farmers didn't have that distinctive slope from neck to shoulder, formed by overdeveloped trapezius muscles. Even the youngsters bore the marks of constant exposure to the elements. Daman simply looked strikingly healthy and unburdened by the sun. He didn't even have calloused hands. And then there was that ramrod parade ground posture. He looked exactly like the elite soldier he was. He would never pass for a local. Etienne hoped the farmers would be more terrified of him than they were of Hokan. The night horizon was amber like the urban skies of Coruscant, but it was flame, not the light of a million lamps that caused the reflection from the clouds. It looked like rain might follow. They could cover the cost with tarpaulin and not cause any curiosity. Layers of bark stalk, sacks of bark grain, and strips of dried kushayan buried Daman's gear, as he kept calling it. His language swung from slang and generally to highly educated subtly from gear, his catch-all noun for any artifact, to DC-17s and DC-15s, and a whole slew of numbers and acronyms that left Etienne befuddled. "Look at that," Daman said, accessing the skyline. That flame front must be 4 clicks at least. That's 1,000,000 or more credits worth of bark going up in smoke. The farmers are going to be furious. The Namorians are going to be even angrier." "Soda Burhan," Janot said. "That's a fair rack of his bark you're using for camouflage, girl. Get going." The Golanin took Daman's datapad and inserted a memstick. "These are all the relatively safe homes. I could chart. Don't advertise your identity, either of you. Even if the master of the house you call on knows who you are, do him the favor of not compromising him by admitting it. Etain had covered her distinctive Jedi cloak with an embrawny ankle-length tunic. Do not indicated her here, and that, she said, the braids too. Unless you want to advertise what you are. Etain hesitated. She had once heard someone say they could never remove their betrothal ring, not until they died. Her Padawan's braid felt equally permanent, as if her soul was woven in with it, and that removing it after so long, even temporarily, would rend the fabric of the universe and underscore her belief that she was not Jedi material. But it had to be done. She unfastened the single thin braid and combed the strands of wavy hair loose with her fingers. She felt less like a Jedi than ever, and not even remotely close to a commander. I imagine you never thought a Jedi commander would run away from a fight, she said to Daman, as they made their carefully unhurried way up the track. Not running away, Daman said. This is E&E, escape and evasion. Sounds like running to me. Tactical withdrawal to regroup. You're a very positive man. The child was almost completely absent now. She could mainly sense focus and purpose. He shamed her without intention. I'm sorry that I lost my composure earlier. Only in private, not under fire, Commander. I said not to call me that. Where we can be overheard, I'll obey your orders. He paused. Everyone loses it now and then. I'm not supposed to. If you don't crack sometimes, how do you know how far you can go? It was a good point. For some reason, he was far more reassuring than Master Fulia had ever been. Fulia, when not getting caught up in putting the galaxy right, was all effortless brilliance. Daman was expert at his craft, too, but there was a sense of hard-won skill, and there was no randomness or mystery to that. She liked him for being so pragmatic. It crossed her mind that she might be saving clone soldiers from death by biological agent so they could die from blaster and cannon rounds. It was a horrible thought. She didn't like having to kill, not even by another's actions. It was going to make life as a commander exceptionally hard. The droids advanced along the edge of the wood with flamethrowers, borrowed from the same farmer whose fields they were burning. Gesokan and his lieutenants, Guvin and Harati, stood in the path of the blaze, staring back at it from 300 meters. We'll have to burn a great deal of land to deny all cover to the enemy, sir, Guvin said. That isn't the point, Harati said. This is as much to create the impressions of protecting the facility as it is to flush out troops. Correct, Hokan said. There's no point alienating the natives. and I can't afford to compensate them all for lost production. This is sufficient. We'll use droids on the remaining boundaries. Kuven seemed undeterred. May I suggest we use hunting strills? We could bring in a pack with their handlers in 2 days. The Trade Federation won't welcome the disruption to the buck harvest, and a shortage of the delicacy will be noticed by some very influential people. I don't care, Hogan said. The same influential people will be even more inconvenienced by the arrival of millions of Republic clones on their home worlds. Hokin was in full Mandalorian battle armor now, not so much for protections as to convey a message to his officers. Sometimes he had to indulge in a little theater. He knew that the glow of the flames illuminating his traditional warrior's armor made a fine spectacle, calculated to impress and overawe. He was at war. He didn't have to prostitute his martial skills as an assassin or bodyguard for weak and wealthy cowards any longer. Kuven was right about the thrills, though. It didn't mean he wouldn't have to deal with his dissent, but finding the Republic troops wouldn't be easy. How many do you estimate now, Harati? He asked. Harati flickered a holoshot into life, and a fly-through image shimmered in the dark. Vessel down here. Confirmed Republic R5 military droid. He pointed. Remains of 2 recreate militia found here, and here. But Gadans had dismembered and dragged the cadavers over a 5-click range, so the exact locations of the kill is estimated. The airspeeder was brought down here. The speeder circuitry was found dismantled here. But as it was at the entrance to Gadan burrows, there's no telling where they might have found it to start with. The engagement with the droid patrol was here, because we deployed the patrol base on that finding. That's pretty much all in a 5-click corridor spanning 40 clicks. Looks obvious to me that they're heading for Teklet, probably to take the port before targeting the facility. It would look that way, sir. Numbers? I would have said no more than 10, sir. We have reports from farmers who found evidence of movement across their land. They are very protective of their crops, so they notice these subtle signs, unlike droids, sir. And what does that suggest, then? Multiple tracks crossing an area of 40 clicks by 30 clicks, sir. Expertly done, too. The locals thought it might be wildlife, but these tracks are not random. I'd say we are being decoyed. 10 troops, 10 pathfinders, special forces, saboteurs. Were they preparing the ground for more troops? Or were they tasked to complete the mission on their own? Hokin wished he had a few Mandalorian mercenaries, not droids and career officers. He kept his concern well hidden behind his full-face helmet. He also wished he had more airspeeders. He'd never needed more than 1 to police farms, and it would take days to have any shipped to Krillora. Farmers can be pretty cooperative, can't they? Remarkably so. Ever since that one found the secretary, sir. Hoken turned and started walking back towards the research facility. That was now empty, but lavishly and conspicuously guarded. He beckoned Harati to follow him. Kuven started to follow too, but Hoken held up his hand to motion him to stay put. "Lieutenant," he said quietly, "any sign of my former employee, Gutenay?" "Not yet, sir. Patrols have been briefed." "Good. And keep an eye on Kuven for me, won't you?" "I don't think he is going to make captain." Harati paused, but briefly. "Understood, sir." It was amazing what that unspoken promise of an extra rank insignia could do. Hoken wondered what had happened to the code of conduct. So there were perhaps 10 commandos operating in the region. Hunting them down would be enormously time-consuming. Bearing luck, Hoken would never catch them, not with droids. And these young Academy theorists, sooner or later, the enemy would need to resupply. Sooner or later, they would show themselves. The Republic was playing decoy games with him, and he with them. It was looking better all the time. They didn't appear to be adopting their usual tactics of landing infantry in force. It was a game of wits, and if need arose, he could sit tight and force the Republic to come to him. If he wanted to bring the Republic close enough to shoot, then he might need an even more compelling bait. Dr. Uthen would understand. She was a pragmatic woman. Fi was getting edgy. It wasn't like him. Nina had only known him a matter of days, but you made quick judgments on small detail if you were a clone commando, especially among your own. He didn't sleep when Nina relieved him on watch, and after 15 minutes, Fi came forward to the observation position and settled down beside him. The fire seemed to have stopped. The glow was still visible, but it was static. It had probably reached one of the streams and was burning itself out. "They knew we're here anyway," Fi said. Nina needed no telepathy to know he was worrying about Daman. "We could try the comlink at longer range. They'd get a fix on positions. They'd have to get lucky. And we only have to be unlucky once." "Okay, sorry, Sarge." He lapsed back into silence. Nina adjusted his infrared filter to remove the distracting light of the fire. Suddenly, it was abnormally silent, and that meant the Gedans had stopped their incessant prowling, which was not good. Nina looked down his rifle scope, one-handed, to get a narrow focus on the bushes in front of him. As he panned across 180 degrees, he caught sight of little paired reflections. The alert eyes of Gedans huddled in uncharacteristic stillness to avoid something. Movement. His scope flashed blue in one quadrant, warning him. Maybe whatever it was could see infrared. He killed the targeting switching to image intensification. And the Mark 1 Aerial, as Carlotta called it, you get eyes and ears, son, good ones. Don't rely on the tech too much. Something was coming. Something slow, stealthy, smaller than a man, more sly than a droid. Nana put his hand on Fi's shoulder. Stay down. Not daring to speak, even on comlink. It was 10 meters away, coming straight at them, making no attempt to stalk. Maybe it didn't know what they were. It was going to get a surprise then. Nana flicked on his tactical spot lamp, and the blinding beam caught a shining black shape. He cut the beam immediately, muscles relaxing. The creature was so flat to the ground now that it looked as if it were flowing water. It was only when it was right in front of them that it sat up and became Valakil. I thought I'd let you see me coming, giving you armaments, said a voice that wasn't Valakil's, but was equally liquid and hypnotic. I make it a rule never to startle a humanoid with a rifle. Just as well that we've seen a Gurlanin before, Fi said, and touched his glove to his helmet politely. I didn't seem to surprise your colleague either. I've come to brief you. I'm Jinnot. Please don't call me ma'am. Every 2 seconds like Daman does. Nana wanted to ask 100 questions about Daman, but the Galanin had used the present tense, and so he was alive. Nana was glad he had his helmet in place. Displays of emotions weren't professional, not to outsiders anyway. You're heading for the wrong target, Jinnot said. You're on a course for the Separatist base. Normally, you'd be knocking on the door of a barracks with 100 droids inside, but they've moved half of them to defend the research facility and patrol the area. Neither Uthin nor Nanovirus is at the actual facility any longer. So it's all going just great, Fi said cheerfully. Your targets are at a villa just outside Imbrani's, despite what evidence you might see of the facility being defended. It's a trap. What's Damon's doing? Nana asked. He has your special ordnance and detailed plans of your targets. I've sent him into hiding with the Jedi. General Fulia, you thought right. He's dead. The Jedi is his Padawan. Thormukien. Don't get your hopes up. She isn't commander material. Not yet. Perhaps never. For the time being, this is still your war. We weren't planning on a frontal assault. Not without infantry, Nina said. Now that we've lost the advantage of a surprise, we are going to have to get it back again. You do have one element, Gazokan, has no accurate idea how few of you there are. I've made sure there are many, many obvious signs of movement through the woods and fields. You've been busy. I can do a good impersonations of a small army, or at least its movements. Do not glance at Aten and Phi. as if checking them. Maybe she was working out how she would mimic the form of a commando. Not thinking of shooting and eating any merlees, are you? Why, that armor isn't looking such a tight fit on you as it should. Vi nodded. She's right. Expending about 30% more calories than planned, Sarge. They didn't calculate for us carrying gear over land. You'll exhaust your rations soon, Janot said. Merlees are delicious. Just never shoot one, please. If necessary, I could hunt them and leave them for you. Why? The one you shoot might be me. It was one more angle they hadn't covered on exercises. Not even Kal Skarata had dealt with Golanans, it seemed. Or if he hadn't mentioned it. Nana liked them. He wondered what world they'd come from. It was bound to be a fascinating one. Where will you head now? Do not ask. I need to let Darman know where you are. I'd have said Avigama, but that's going the wrong way, from what you've told us. I can give you the location of a suitable area nearer Imbrani, and when I return to Darman, I will give him the same coordinates. Atin cut in. They mine gems here, right? Sycacrots and various green silicates, mainly, yes. Picks and shovels, or mechanized. Mechanized. They'll have explosives for blasting then, and remote detonators with nice, safe, long-range settings. Golanans chuckled just like a human. She might have been amused. On the other hand, she might have been thinking Atin was a madman. But Nina liked the directions that Atin's inventive mind was taking. Get your holler shots, Janot said. Let me give you a virtual guide to the gem industry of the Imbrani region. Notice to Cologne citizens. Anyone found with Republic personnel on their land will have that property confiscated and will forfeit their freedom. They, their family, and anyone employed by them in any capacity will be delivered to the Trandoshan's representative at Teklet for enslavement. Anyone actively aiding or sheltering Republic personnel will face the death penalty. A reward is offered for anyone providing information leading to the capture of Republic personnel or deserters from the former militia or the separatist armed forces, in particular Lieutenant Goutanay or Lieutenant Percovan, by order of Major Gez Hokan, Commanding Officer, Teklet Garrison. A thin, cold drizzle started falling almost as soon as the sun came up. It felt like Commando. It felt like home. And that was at once both reassuring and unpleasant. The moisture beaded on Damon's cloak, and he shook it off. Merle wool was full of natural oils that made it feel unpleasantly clammy next to the skin. He longed to get back into the black bodysuit, and not only because of its ballistic properties. Etain was pushing the rear of the cart. Damen was pulling it, walking between its thin shafts. There were times on the rutted track when she had the worst of it. But, as she kept telling him, Jedi could summon the Force. I could help, he said. I can manage. Her voice sounded like she was straining it through her teeth. If this is like right gear, I'd rather not see the regular variety. I meant I could help with martial skills, if you want to train with your lightsaber. I'd probably end up slicing off something you'd miss later. No, she wasn't what he was expecting at all. They walked on, trying hard to look downtrodden and rural, which wasn't so much of a challenge when you were hungry, wet, and tired. The dirt road was deserted. At this time of year, there should have been visible activity at first light. Ahead of them was the first safe house, a single-story hut topped by a mixture of straw, thatch, and rustling metal plates. "I'll knock," Eighteen said. "They'll probably run for their lives if they see you first." Damen took it as a sensible observation, rather than an insult. He pulled his cloak up across his mouth and pushed the cart out of sight behind the hut, looking around slowly and carefully as if he were casually taking in the countryside. There were no windows at the rear, just a simple door and a well-worn path in the grass leading to a pit with an interesting aroma and a plank across it. It wasn't an ideal location for an ambush, but he wasn't taking chances. Stopping in the open like this made you vulnerable. He didn't like it at all. He wished he could feign invisibility like Sergeant Scarata, a short, wryly nondescript little man who could pass completely unnoticed until he decided to stop and fight. And Scarata could fight in a lot of ways that weren't in the training manual. Damen recalled all of them. He pressed his elbows into his side to reassure himself that his rifle was within easy reach. Then he slipped his hand under his cloak and felt for one of the probes in his belt. When he reached the front again, Eighteen was still rapping on the doorpost. There was no response. She stood back and seemed to be looking at the door, as if willing it to open. "They're gone," she said. "I can't sense anyone." Damen straightened up and walked casually toward the rear of the house. "Let me check the regular way." He beckoned her to follow. Once around the back, he took a probe and slid the flat sensor strip carefully under the gap beneath the back door. The readout on the sections that he was holding said there were no traces of explosives or pathogens. If the place was booby-trapped, it would be very low tech. It was time for a hands-on check. He pressed on the door with his left hand, rifle in his right. "It's empty," Eighteen whispered. "Can you sense the tripwire that'll send a row of metal spikes stringing into you?" he asked. Point taken. The door swung slowly open. Nothing. Damen took a remote from his belt and sent it inside, pinging up low-light images from the interior. There was no movement. The room appeared clear. He let the door swing back, recalled the remote, and stood with his back to the entrance for one final check around him. I go in, look again, then you follow me. If you hear me say, in, okay? He said, almost under his breath. He didn't miss her eyes. Lightsaber ready, too. As soon as he was inside, he pulled his rifle, stood hard up in the corner, and scanned the room. Clear. So clear, in fact, that last night's meal was still half eaten on the table. There was a single door that didn't appear to open to the exterior. A cupboard, a closet. Maybe a threat. He trained his rifle on it. In, Daman said. Etain slipped through as he gestured her to the corner opposite, then pointed. Me, that door, you, back door. Etain nodded and drew her lightsaber. He walked up to the closet and tried to raise the latch, but it didn't open. So he took 2 steps back and put his boot to it. Hard. They didn't build well around here. The door splintered and hung on one rusted hinge. Behind it was a straw room. It made sense now. In a poor country, you locked away your food supply. They left in a hurry, Daman said. Are you wearing your armored boots? Etain said. I wouldn't be kicking down a door without them. He'd covered them in a tightly wound sacking. No boots, no soldier. As true as it ever was. He stepped through the gap into the store and studied the shelves. You're just learning the first step in clearing a house. What's that? Etain reached past him for a metal container marked Gavi Mail. Who's watching the door? Who's watching our gear? Sorry, no problem. I expect it never occurs to you when you have Jedi senses to rely on. There. He hadn't even tried to call her ma'am this time. If we knew why the occupants left in such a hurry, this might have made a decent place to lay up. But we don't. So let's grab some supplies and move on. He took dried fruit and something that looked like cured leathery meat, making a mental note to test all of it with the toxin strip in his med pack. It was too kind of the locals to leave all this. There was, of course, every chance they had fled in terror from the same violence that he had witnessed looking down from his observation point just after he landed. Etain was filling a couple of water bottles from a pump outside. I've got a filter for that, Daman said. Are you sure you weren't trained by Nemorians? You're in enemy territory. He smiled sadly. Not all soldiers wear uniforms. She'd catch on. She had to. The thought that a Jedi might be unable to offer the leadership he had been promised was almost unbearable. His emotions didn't have names, but they were feelings that had memories embedded in them. Finishing a 50-kilometer run 32 seconds outside the permitted time, and being made to run it again. Seeing a clone trooper fall on a beachhead landing exercise, weighed down by his pack and drowning, while no directing staff paused to help. A commander whose sniping score was only 95% and whose whole batch disappeared from training and were never seen again. They were all things that made his stomach sink, and each time it did, it never quite regained the same levels as before. "Are you all right?" Etain asked. "Is it your leg?" "My leg's fine now, thank you," he said. Daman wanted his trust back, and soon. They resumed their path along the dirt track that was gradually liquefying into mud. The rain at their backs. By the time they got to the next farm, the rain seemed to have set in for the day. Daman thought of his squad making their way through sodden countryside, perfectly dry in their sealed suits, and he smiled. At least this made it harder for anyone to track them. A woman with a pinched expression like a Gadan stared at them from the front step of the farmhouse. It was a grander building than the last one, not by much, but the walls were stone, and there was a lean-to shelter along one side. Etain walked up to her. Daman waited, looking aware of an outdoor refresher to the right that might contain a threat, keeping half an eye on a group of youngsters tinkering with a large machine on rollers. They all looked so different. Everyone was so different. After some conversation, Etain beckoned him and I indicated the lean-to. So far so good. Daman still didn't plan on relinquishing his ordnance. He reached into the bark for his helmet and detached the comlink, just in case. Nina tried to contact him. "Are you coming?" Etain asked. "Just a moment." Daman took out a string of AP micromines and trailed them around the front of the house, as far as the cable would stretch. He set them to run off a remote signal and tucked the transmitter sections of the detonator in his belt. Etain watched him with an unspoken question, perfectly clear from her expression. "In case anyone gets any ideas," Daman said. "You've played this game before?" Etain said. He certainly had. The first thing he checked when he entered the farmhouse, one hand against his rifle, was where the best observation point might be. It was a perforated ear brick that gave him a good view of the road. There was a large window in the far wall with a brown sacking sheet tied across it. Reassured, but only slightly, he sat down at the table that dominated the front room. The family that took them in consisted of the thin, Gadan-faced woman, her sister, her even thinner husband, and 6 youngsters, ranging from a small boy clutching a piece of grubby blanket to the nearly full-grown men working outside. They wouldn't give their names. They didn't want a visit, they said, as if a visit was much more than it seemed. Daman was riveted. These people were humans like him. Yes, they were all different, but still they had features that looked similar. Not the same, but similar. To others in the group. They were different sizes and different ages too. He had seen diversity in training manuals. He knew what different species looked like. But the images always came to mind with data about weapons, carried and reared to aim a shot for maximum stopping power. This was the first time in his life that he had been in close contact with diverse humans who were in the majority. To them, perhaps, he also looked unique. They sat around the rough wooden table. Darman tried not to speculate on what the stains in the wood might be, because they looked like blood. Iti nudged him. "They cut up the Merly carcasses here," she whispered, and he wondered if she could read his mind. He tested the bread and soup placed in front of him for toxins. Satisfied that it was safe, he dug in. After a while, he was aware that the woman and the small boy were staring at him. When he looked up, the child fled. "He doesn't like soldiers much," the woman said. "Is the Republic coming to help us?" "I can't answer that, ma'am," Daman said. He meant that he would never discuss operational matters. It was an automatic response under interrogation. Never just say yes, never just say no, and give no information except your ID number. Etain answered for him, which was her prerogative as a commander. "Do you want the Republic's help?" she asked. "You any better than the Nemes?" "I like to think so." The table fell silent again. The man finished the soup. Politics was nothing to do with him. He was more interested in filing up on something that had flavor and texture. If all went according to plan, in a few weeks he'd be far from here and on another mission. And if it didn't, he'd be dead. The future of Krelora was generally of no relevance to him. The woman kept refilling his bowl with soup until he slowed up and eventually couldn't manage any more. It was the first hot food he'd had in days, and he felt good. Little perks like that boosted morale. Etain didn't seem so enthusiastic about it. She was moving each chunk cautiously around with a spoon, as if the liquid contained mines. "You need to keep your strength up," he said. "I know. You can have my bread. Thanks." It was so quiet in the room that Darman could hear the individual rhythms of everyone's chewing, and the faint scrape of utensils against bowls. He could hear the distant, muffled sound of Merleys nearby, an intermittent gargling noise. But he didn't hear something that Etain suddenly did. She sat bolt upright and turned her head to one side, eyes unfocused. "Someone's coming, and it's not Janot," she hissed. Daman flung off his cloak and pulled his rifle. The woman and her relatives jumped up from the table so fast that it tipped despite its weight, sending bowls tumbling to the floor. Etain drew her lightsaber, and it shimmered into life. They both watched the entrance. The family scrambled through the back door. the woman pausing to grab a large metal bowl and a bag of meal from the sideboard. Darman doused the lamps and peered out through a hole in the air brick. Without his visor, he was completely dependent on his Dees for long-distance vision. He couldn't see anything. He held his breath and listened hard. Etain moved toward him, gesturing at the far wall, indicating 7. A whole hand, then 2 fingers. Where, he whispered. She was marking something on the dirt floor. He watched her finger draw an outline of the 4 walls and then stab a number of dots outside them. Most around the ones she'd been pointing to, and 1 dot near the front door. She put her lips so close to his ear it made him jump. 6 there, 1 here. It was a breath, barely audible. Darman indicated the far wall and pointed to himself. Etain gestured to the door. Me? He nodded. He gestured 1, 2, 3 quickly with his fingers and gave her a thumbs up. I'll count to 3, she nodded. Whoever was outside hadn't knocked. It didn't bode well. He clipped the grenade attachment to his rifle and aimed at the far side. Etain stood at the door, lightsaber held above her head for a downward stroke. Darman hoped her aggression would triumph over her self-doubt. He gestured with his left hand, rifle balanced in his right. 1, 2, 3. He fired 1 grenade. It smashed through the sack-covered window and blew a hole in the wall. Just as he was firing the second, the blast kicked him backward, and the front door burst open as Etain brought her lightsaber down in a brilliant blue arc. Darman switched his rifle to blast setting and swung his sight on the figure. But it was an Ibaran, and it was dead, sliced through from clavicle to sternum. 2, Etain said, indicating the window, or at least where it had been seconds earlier. Darman sprang forward across the room, dodging the table and firing as he came to the hole, smashed in the wall. When he stumbled through the gap, there were 2 Trandoshans coming toward him with blasters, faces that seemed all scales and lumps, wet mouths gaping. He opened fire. 1 return shot scared his left shoulder. Then there was nothing but numb silence for a few moments, followed by the gradual awareness that someone was screaming in agony outside. But it wasn't him, and it wasn't Etain. That was all that mattered. He picked his way across the room, conscious of the growing pain in his shoulder. It would have to wait. It's all clear, Etain said. Her voice was shaking. Except for that man. Forget him, Darman said. He couldn't, of course. The soldier was making too much noise. The screams would attract attention. Load up, we're going. Despite Etain's assurance that there was no more waiting outside, Darman edged out the door and kept his back to the wall, all the way around the exterior of the farmhouse. The wounded soldier was in a barn. Dahman didn't even check how badly hurt he might be before he shot him cleanly in the head. There was nothing else he could do, and the mission came first. He wondered if Jedi could sense droids as well. He'd have to ask Etain later. He'd been told Jedi could do extraordinary things, but it was one thing to know it and another entirely to see it in action. It had probably saved their lives. What was that? She asked. When he returned to the lean-to, she already had the extra pack slung on her back, and he realized she'd actually moved the micromines, even though they were still live. Dahman's swallowing anxiety disabled the detonator and added it to the list of things he needed to teach her. Finishing the job, he said, and pulled on his bodysuit, sections by sections. She looked away. You killed him, yes. He was lying wounded. I'm not a medic. Oh, Dahman. Ma'am, this is a war. People try to kill you. You try to kill them first. There are no second chances. Everything else you need to know about warfare is an amplification of that. She was horrified, and he really wished he hadn't upset her. Had they given her a lethal lightsaber and not taught her what it really meant to draw one? I'm sorry. He was in a bad mood. He was in a bad way anyway. Death seemed to shock her. I killed that Umbaran. That's the idea, ma'am. Nicely done, too. She didn't say anything else. She watched him attach the armor plates, and when he finally replaced his helmet, he knew he didn't care how conspicuous he looked in it, because he wasn't going to take it off again in a hurry. He needed that edge. No more safe houses, Dahman said. There's no such thing. Etain followed him into the woodland at the back of the house, but she was preoccupied. I've never killed anyone before, she said. You did fine, Dahman told her. His shoulder was throbbing, gnawing into his concentration. A clean job. It's still not something I would care to repeat. Jedi are trained to fight, aren't they? Yes, but we never killed anyone in training. Dahman shrugged, and it hurt. We did. He hoped she got over it fast. No, it wasn't enjoyable, killing, but it had to be done. And killing with lightsaber or blaster was relatively clean. He wondered how she'd handled having to stick a blade in someone and see what ran out. She was a Jedi, and with any luck she'd never have to. Them or us, he said. You're in pain. Nothing major. I'll use the Bacta when we reach the RV. I suppose they turned us in. The farmers? Yeah, that's civilians for you. Etain made a non-committal grunt and followed silently behind him. They moved deeper into the woods, and Dahman calculated how many rounds he'd expended. If he kept engaging targets at this rate, he'd be down to his sidearm by nightfall. It's amazing how you can sense people, Dahman said. Can you detect droids too? Not especially, she said. Usually just living beings. Maybe I can. A faint whine made Dahman turn in to see a blue bolt of light streaking toward him from behind. It struck a tree a few meters ahead, splitting it like kindling in a puff of vapor. Obviously not, Etain said. It was going to be another long, hard day. A warning siren sounded. 3 long blasts repeated thrice. Then the peaceful fields northwest of Imbrani shook with a massive explosion, and terrified Merlis bolted for the cover of the hedgerows. Blasting today, then, Fai said. Lovely day for it. Nana couldn't see anything but droids. Industrial droids. Moving around the quarry. He ran his glove across his visor to clear the droplets of rain and tried several binoc magnifications, flicking between settings with eye movements. But if there were organic workers around, he couldn't see any. The quarry was a massive and startling gouge in the landscape, an amphitheater with steep sides that allowed droid excavators to dig out rock for processing. The depression sloped gently at one side. It was a towering cliff on the other. A small site office with alloy-plated walls and no windows sat beside a wide track at the top of the slope. Apart from the steady processions of droids laden with raw rock for the screening plant, the area was deserted, but something, was controlling the detonations. They had to be in the building, and structures with solid alloy walls like that tended to have interesting contents. The all-clear siren sounded. The droids moved into scope, up the loosened rock, setting spray and mud flying as they rumbled up the slopes. Okay, let's see what we can liberate from the hut, Nina said. Attend with me. Fai, stay here and cover. They darted out of the trees and across 100 meters of open land to the edge of the quarry, dodging between giant droids that took no notice of them. One droid, its wheels as high as Nina, was tall, swung its bucket scoop unexpectedly and struck his shoulder plate, a glancing blow. He stumbled and Atin caught his arm, steadying him. They paused, waiting for the next droid to return up the slope, then jogged alongside it until level with the site building. They were now exposed, pressed close to the front wall. The building was only 10 meters wide. Atin knelt at the door and studied the single lock. Pretty insubstantial if this is where they store the explosives, he said. Let's take a look. Atin stood up slowly and placed a scope on the drawer to listen for movement. He shook his head at Nina. Then he slid a flimsy, thin, flat endoscope around the jam, working it back and forth, slowly and carefully. Now that's a tight fit, he said. Can't get it in. We could always just walk in there. Remember, we are probably heading into a store full of explosives. If I could get a probe through, it could at least get a sniff of the air and test for chemicals. Okay, let's walk in carefully then. There was no handle. Nina stood to the hinged side, Dees in one hand, and pressed silently on the single plate that made up the door. It didn't yield. Ethan nodded. He took out the handheld ram, 10 kilos, that had seemed like dead, useless weight in the packs until now. He squared it up to the lock. Nina raised one finger. 3, 2. It applied a force of 2 metric tons. Go. The door fell open, and they both leapt back as a stream of blaster fire shot out. It stopped suddenly. They squatted on either side of the entrance. Usually this was simple. If someone inside didn't want to leave a grenade, coax them out, one way or another. But with a high chance of explosives being inside, that method was a little too emphatic. Niner shook his head. Aten moved the endoscope carefully, getting a glimpse of the building's interior. Then he edged the probe into the doorway, drawing another stream of blaster fire. 2 moving around, he said. Lights out, but the probe got a sniff of explosives. Spot lamp and rush them then. Aten shook his head. He took out a grenade and locked it in the safety position. How nervous would you be if you were sitting on enough stuff to put this quarry into orbit? Drink spilling nervous, I'd say. Yeah, Aten hefted the grenade a few times. That's what I thought. He barreled the disabled grenade into the doorway and jerked back. 3 seconds later, 2 weak way rushed out. Nina and Aten fired simultaneously. 1 weak way dropped instantly, and the other's momentum carried him on a few meters farther, until he fell in the path at the top of the ramp. The quarry droids trundled on, oblivious. If the shot hadn't killed him, the advancing droid did. Sarge, you need some help down there? Nina motioned Aten inside. No, Phi. We're set here. Keep an eye out in case we got company. The building reeked of cooking in an unwashed weak way. A small droid lights blinking on standby, and caked in dried mud, stood by a console. The rest of the space, 3 rooms, was taken up by explosives, detonators, and various spare parts and stenciled crates. There's your demolitions, man, Aten said, tapping the droid on his head, and retrieved his grenade. He wiped it with his glove and put it back in his belt pack. I'd rather have Dom Man, Nina said. He studied the inert droid, which seemed to be waiting for the dislodged rock to be cleared. It jerked suddenly into life, made its way toward a crate of explosives, opened the safety lid, and took out several tubes. Then it turned towards the room, where the detonators were kept. Nina reached out and opened its control panel to deactivate it. Take some time off, friend, he said. Blasting's over for the day. It didn't appear that the weakways had been employed here. The droid sorted all the charges and oversaw the blasting. On an upturned crate were the remains of a meal, eaten off makeshift plates, fashioned from box lids. It looked like the Weekways had been hiding out here, and Nana was pretty sure he knew who they had been avoiding. Aten checked the various charges and detonators, selecting what appeared to take his fancy and piling it in the clear space on the muddy floor. He was a connoisseur of technology, especially things with complex circuitry. "Lovely," he said, with genuine satisfaction. "Some debts here that you can set off from 50 clicks. That's what we need. A bit of a pyrotechnics show." "Can we carry as much as we need?" "Oh, there's some beauties here, Damen. Damen would think they were pretty basic, but they're going to work fine as a diversion. Absolute brutes." Aten held up spheres about the size of a scoop ball. "Now this baby." Crash. Something fell to the floor in one of the rooms, off the main one. Aten held his rifle on the doorway, and Nina drew his sidearm. He was edging towards the door when a sudden voice almost made him squeeze the trigger. Akzami Kipuna." The voice was shaking and judging. By the accent, it probably belonged to a Weekway. "Don't kill. I help you." "Out now." Projected from his helmet. Aten's voice was intimidating enough, without a rifle to back it up. A Weekway stumbled out from behind a stack of crates and sank to his knees, hands held up. Aten pushed him down flat with his boot. Deeks aimed at his head. "Arms behind your back, and don't even breathe. Got it?" The Weekway appeared to have got it very quickly. He froze and let Nina cuff his wrists with a length of wire. Nina did a sweep of the rooms again, worried that if they'd missed one target, they might have missed more. But it was clear he was back and squatted down by the Weekway's head. "We don't need a prisoner slowing us down," he said. "Give me a good reason why I shouldn't kill you. Please, I know Hokan. I'll bet you know him pretty well. If you were hiding out here. What's your name?" "Gutane. I were right-hand man. Not any more, though, eh?" "I know places." "Yeah, we know places, too. I got key codes. We've got ordnance. I got codes to Teklit Ground Station." "You wouldn't be messing around, would you, Gutane?" "I don't have time for that. Who can kill me? You'll take me with you. You Republic guys. Nice. You gentlemen." "Steady, Gutane. All those syllables might burn you out." Nina looked at Aten. He shrugged. "He'll slow us down, Sarge." "Then we either leave him here or kill him." The conversation wasn't designed to scare Gutane, but it had that effect anyway. It was a genuine problem. Nana was reluctant to drag a prisoner around with them, and there was no guarantee the Weekway wouldn't try to buy back favor from Hokan with intelligence on their strength and movements. He was an unwelcome dilemma. Aten clicked his teeth and it started to power up. "I get you Nemi boots too." "We definitely don't need him. Nemi's really mad at Hokan. He put droids in his nice, shiny villa. Floor's messed up." Gutane's breathing rasped in the silence of the room. Nina weighed the extra baggage against the prospect of some edge in gaining access to Uthan. Where's Uthan now? Still in Villa. Nowhere else to hide. You know a lot about Hokan, don't you? Everything, Gutane, was all submission. Too much. Okay, Nina said. You got a reprieve. Atin waited a couple of seconds before powering down his rifle. He seemed doubtful. Nana couldn't see his expression, but he heard the characteristic slight of exhalations. That was Atin's silent, oh, terrific. He'll leave a trail of what could follow. Ideas? Yeah, Atin leaned over Gutane. And the weak way turned his head slightly, eyes wide with terror. He seemed more terrified by the helmet than the gun. Where do the droids take the raw rock? Big place south of Tiklet. How far south? 5 clicks maybe? Aten straightened up and indicated with a pointed finger that he was going outside. Technical solution. Wait 1. His predilections for gadgets was becoming a blessing. Nina was tempted to take back the unkind thoughts he'd had about the man's training sergeant. He followed him outside. Aten jogged alongside one of the excavation's droids, matching his pace before jumping up, scrambling onto its flat bed. The machine rumbled inexorably up the slope as if nothing was going to divert it from its progress to the screening plant. Then it stopped and swung around narrowly, missing the droid, bringing up its rear. It paused a couple of meters from Nina. Aten's kneeling on the flat bed held up 2 cables. You can't get it to do tricks, he said, but you can start. Steer and stop it now. Brain bypass, eh? I've seen a few people with those, so we ride it into town. How else are we going to move all these explosives? They couldn't pass up the chance. Nana had plans for the charges, places to lay them all around the brawny countryside. They also had a temptingly neat window of opportunity to take out the ground stationed at Teklet, and rendering Hokan's troops deaf to what was happening around them would double their chances of pulling off the mission. It meant they could use their own long-range comlinks at last. Tell you what, Nina said. I'll take this one to Teklet. You hotwire another and take 5 and our friend as far back down the road to Brawny as you can get with as much as you can carry. He took out his datapad and checked the chart. Lay up here where Janot suggested, with a droid if you can, without it if you can't. A bulldozer droid on a steady path to the screening plant would attract no attention. It just had to overshoot by a few kilometers. It would be dusk soon, and darkness was their best asset when it came to moving around. Nana hauled Gutane out of the building. Is the ground station defended in any way? Gutane had his head lowered, looking up from under his brows, as if blows to the head normally unaccompanied questions. Just fence to stop melees and thieving. Only farmers around, and they're scared anyway. If you're lying to me, I'll see that you get back to Geshoken alive, okay? Okay, truth, I swear. Nana summoned 5 from his cover positions, and they loaded 2 droids. One carried enough explosives to reduce the ground stations to powder several times over, and the other took everything they could lay their hands on, except for some detonators and explosives, to keep the blasting droid busy for a few more hours. There was no point letting the quarry silence advertise the fact that they had liberated some ordnance. It would spoil the whole surprise. They loaded Gutane last, bundling him into the huge bucket scoop with his arms still bound. He protested at being stuck on top of spheres of explosives. Don't worry, Atten said dismissively. I've got all the debts here. He bounced a few detonators up and down in his palm. Gutane flinched. You'll be fine. You're not quite an asset, Vi said. He took off his helmet to drink from his bottle, and Gutane made an incoherent noise. She could be right behind us now, and we'd never know. I hope they stay on our side. Nino removed his helmet too, and they shared the bottle before handing it to Aten. The last shrig. What's that request running about now? Don't know, Aten said, and took his helmet off as well. He paused, bottle in hand, and they all stood and stared at Gutane, loaded in the scoop of the droid-like cargo. His mouth was slightly open and his eyes were darting from one commando to the next. He was making a slight sound, as if he was trying to scream but couldn't. It's Aten's face, Vi said. Don't stand there being so ugly, man. You're scaring him. Nana gave the Requiem a quick prod with his glove to shut him up. What's the matter? He asked. Haven't you ever seen commandos before? They were here. The break that Geshoken had been waiting for had come. A farmer had rushed to notify the authorities that Republic soldiers, 1 man, 1 woman, both very young, were at a house on the Imbrani Teklet Road. Hoken studied the dripping foliage at the side of the farmhouse. The maze of footsteps in the mud and the crushed stalks were no different from those on any farm, and they were disappearing fast in the rain. Behind the ramshackle collections of sheds and stone walls, the land sloped away to the Bran River. It's a mess in there, sir, Harati said. 1 wall nearly blown out, all dead, and that was just 2 enemies' commandos. 1, Hoken said. 1? Only male clones in the front line. The other had to be a Jedi. He turned over the body of the unbound with his boots and shook his head. That wound was made by a lightsaber. I know what a lightsaber wound looks like. 2 people. I wouldn't even have that information if it hadn't been for informants. Do I have to rely on dung-caked farmers for intelligence? Do I? He regretted having to shout, but it seemed necessary. Why can't anyone manage to call it in when they make an enemy contact? think. Use your decutla heads, or I'll show you how to recognize a lightsaber wound the hard way. Two droids began lifting the Umbaran's body onto a speeder. Leave that thing where it is. Get after your comrades and find me some enemy. Harati put his hand to the side of his head. Droids have found something else in the house up the road, sir. His expression fell blank as he listened to his comlink. Oh. He turned to Hokan. I think you should see this for yourself, sir. Harati didn't strike him as an officer. That would waste his time. They mounted the speeder and worked their way back up the road to another small, dilapidated hovel set among the trees. Hokan followed Harati into the farmhouse, where a couple of droids had illuminated the rooms with spot lamps. For some reason, he would never fathom the first aspect of the chaos that caught his eye was the soup tureen lying on its side on the filthy floor. It was only when he turned his head that he saw the bodies. Ah, Hokan said. Soldiers used blasters. In a pinch, they would use knives or blunt objects. But he had never known anyone in uniform, not even his ragtag militia, who used teeth. The three adults were ripped and torn as if a large carnivore had attacked them. All had crushed injuries to what was left of their throats. One woman had so little intact tissue in her neck that the head was bent over at almost 90 degrees. Hokan found himself staring. There are others outside in the shed, Harati said. Hokan had never considered himself easily disturbed, but this worried him. It was an act by something he didn't recognize and couldn't comprehend, beyond the scope of a sentient creature, Simple's revenge. It might have been coincidence, an animal attack on someone who happened to be an informer, but he couldn't think of any species on Quilora that could or would bring down humans. Harati studied the bodies. I didn't think killing civilians was the Republic's style. It's not, Hokan said, and commandos wouldn't waste time on work that wouldn't aid their effort. Well, whoever killed them wasn't motivated by robbery. Harati picked up a large metal bowl from the floor, dusted it with his glove, and set it on a shelf. This is probably our informer. I wouldn't count on much assistance from now on. Word will get around fast. You're certain there are no blaster wounds? It might have been simple predation. He knew in his gut that it wasn't. But what had done this? None, Harati said. Hokan didn't like it at all. He beckoned Harati to follow him and walked out briskly to summon two droids. I want a ring around Umbrani. Pull all the droids back. I'd rather lose Teklet than risk Uthan's project. We could arrange for Dr. Uthans to be evacuated. Moving her and her entourage is going to be slow and conspicuous. We are better off defending our positions than moving. I want half the droids blatantly visible at the facility and the other half around the villa. But discreetly, understand? There was a rattle of metal in the distance, and Hokan spun around to see droids swarming towards the riverbank. Have they found anything? Harati pressed his hand to his head. Listening to the comlink, 2 enemies sighted 5 clicks west of here, sir. The droids have engaged them. That's more like it, Hawkins said. I like at least one alive. Preferably both, if the girl's a Jedi. He swung onto the speeder bike and motioned Harati to sit up front and drive. The speeder zipped down the track, heading west at Harati's confirmed coordinates, with a droid patrol. Hoken hoped the droids could manage and instructions like take them alive. He needed real troops for this, actual soldiers who could get into awkward places and see subtle things. He now had just 30 organic officers remaining, and slightly under 100 droids. Ideal for a small set-piece battle, but next to useless for countering a commando force, spread over terrain with plenty of cover. They'd definitely have to come to him, just this once, though. He'd humor them and join the pursuit.